The air in the valley still carries a silence heavier than fog. It is the unnerving silence of a town that ceased to exist, not in ruin, but in a chilling, complete absence. For 5 decades, the name Oakhaven has been whispered. It is a ghost story for historians and a stain on the national map. One freezing night in March 1974, every soul, 314 men, women, and children, vanished. Doors were left ajar, as if someone had just stepped out. Fires still glowed low in the hearths. Uneaten meals sat cooling on the dining room tables. There was no struggle, no sign of a mass exodus. There was no evidence of violence, just an unsettling, profound emptiness. This documentary does not seek to confirm the myth. We seek the truth. We seek the truth buried under the snowdrifts of time, the truth of the night Oakhaven simply disappeared. This is the story of Oakhaven, a deeply traditional farming community. It was nestled in the remote, forgotten Blackwood Valley. It is also the story of the 4 primary families who formed the village's backbone. There were the blacksmiths, the mill owners, the preacher's line, and the mayor's family. Their lives were intensely interwoven and secretive. But most critically, this is the story of the official investigation. It was spearheaded by the fledgling Bureau of Missing Persons. It centered on the lone, disgraced detective Elias Thorne. Thorne refused to let the case dissolve into folklore. It's an examination of how quickly a profound human tragedy can be swept away. It was replaced by an even profounder terror. That terror was the inexplicable. The narrative reveals the cost of confronting a mystery that violates the laws of nature. The first anomalous event was not on the night of the disappearance. It happened 3 weeks prior. Old Mr. Silas, the village's unofficial weather diviner, was found wandering. He was in the high pasture, his hands clutching his ears. His eyes were wide and completely vacant. He spoke of an endless, low song coming from the earth. He described a vibration that rattled the very bones of the surrounding hills. The village doctor diagnosed him with acute anxiety. Silas had not left his property in 20 years, and he was not anxious. He was profoundly, deeply terrified. He died 3 days later in his sleep. The official cause of death was listed as a heart attack. His granddaughter would later recall the look on his face. It was not pain, but a kind of rapt, terrible anticipation. Oakhaven was a village defined entirely by its intense isolation. It was surrounded by dense, mostly unmapped forest. It was accessible by a single, often impassable dirt road. The inhabitants relied on a staunch, almost superstitious adherence to old traditions. The valley itself was known for its peculiar, unnatural silence. It was a deep quiet that seemed to absorb all human sound. They had no telephone lines, and no radio signals reached them. The nearest major town was a long, 4-hour drive away. This self-imposed remoteness was something the villagers cherished. It became the investigators' first, most difficult obstacle. When the state police finally arrived, the village was a perfectly preserved, utterly vacant tableau. It was an eerie snapshot of ordinary life, paused forever. The initial sweep of the village yielded 3 critical, yet contradictory, pieces of evidence. The first clue: every single mechanical clock in the village had stopped precisely at 3:17 a.m. The second clue: a total of 17 working dogs were found unharmed. They were all penned in the old communal barn. This was a place they were never kept overnight. The third clue: in the center of the village square, an impossible symbol was etched into the cobblestones. It was complex, resembling an insect's eye or a celestial chart. The police dismissed the frozen clocks as an electrical coincidence. The strange symbol was cataloged as a local adolescent prank. Detective Thorne, however, saw them differently. He saw them as the cryptic, coded language of the disappearance itself. He believed the clues were deliberately left behind. The investigation centered immediately on three primary figures. Elias Thorne, the maverick detective, led the charge. He was haunted by a failed case and saw Oakhaven as his last chance for redemption. Dr. Evelyn Reed, the young bureau geologist, followed Thorne. She was insistent on a seismic event, an earthly explanation. Yet, she grew increasingly unnerved by the lack of any physical trace. The last key figure was Father Alastair. He was the preacher from the next town, and he had visited Oakhaven weekly for 40 years. Father Alastair was the last outsider to speak to the mayor. He reported a frantic, 2-minute phone call the night before. The mayor spoke of the sky being too close, and then the line died. Alastair's testimony anchored the timeline to the exact early hours of March 14th. The disappearance was initially discovered by a solitary delivery truck driver. His name was Thomas Gale, and he was transporting lumber through the Blackwood Valley. Gale arrived at Oakhaven at dawn, expecting the usual commotion. Instead, he found an absolute, deathly stillness. He testified to the unnerving completeness of the town's readiness for the next day. Laundry was still hanging out to dry on the lines. Tools were neatly racked in the workshops. A child's wooden swing was gently swaying in the light morning breeze. But the most disturbing detail was the faint layer of frost he observed. This frost was not on the ground outside. It was coating the interior of every single window. This suggested a sudden, profound drop in internal temperature. It happened simultaneous with the absence of all human warmth. The Bureau's official report was rushed, inadequate, and dismissive of the evidence. It suggested a coordinated mass flight. The report cited the village's isolation as a breeding ground for religious extremism. This was contradicted by the stark physical evidence. Full larders were found, indicating no preparation for a journey. Bank accounts were completely untouched. There were no records of pre-purchased travel tickets. An anonymous journal, later recovered from the mayor's safe, spoke of a growing dread. It mentioned strange lights in the sky that moved with intelligence. It also spoke of the low, pervasive humming that preceded Mr. Silas's collapse. Local authorities quickly pushed the mass flight narrative for closure. Thorne, however, fixated on the journal's cryptic entries. He became convinced the vanishing was an arrival, not a departure. Detective Thorne began meticulously mapping the village, working against Bureau orders. He dismissed the symbolic etching in the square as a distraction. Instead, he focused his forensic analysis on the very soil. Dr. Reed's initial geological survey showed no signs of a sinkhole. There was no evidence of an underground structural collapse. Yet, Thorne's private forensic team detected a massive magnetic anomaly. It was centered precisely around the old village well. They theorized a colossal, localized electrical event. However, there was no scorch mark, no melted metal, no frayed wire. The houses, structurally and electrically, were pristine. It was as if the village had been emptied by a force that acted only upon living matter. The inanimate world was left standing, completely untouched. A month into the investigation, a breakthrough appeared to occur. A small, child's doll was found 60 miles away. It was caught in a fishing net in a remote, fast-moving lake. Inside the doll, a tiny, folded note was discovered. It was written in a child's shaky handwriting. The note read, "The quiet is louder now. We go with the lights." The Bureau seized on this, declaring it proof of the mass flight theory. They argued the note was simply dropped during transit. Thorne, however, was immediately suspicious of the finding. He noted the paper's fibers were deeply waterlogged. The ink was, impossibly, perfectly preserved. This was a chemical impossibility for a note submerged for a month. He later proved the note was written with a specific archival ink. It was the mayor's ceremonial ink, not common to the town. The find was meticulously engineered, a deliberate plant designed to mislead investigators. The geometric symbol from the village square resurfaced in a more unsettling form. Dr. Reed, running spectral analysis on the air composition inside the village church, found a residue. It was almost imperceptible, a microscopic dust clinging to the wooden altar. Under a powerful electron microscope, the residue resolved into crystalline microstructures. These structures perfectly mirrored the complexity of the cobblestone etching. The substance was undeniably organic, yet it contained no carbon. It also contained no nitrogen or oxygen, the building blocks of terrestrial life. It was an element with no known terrestrial analog. It was a fine, almost gaseous particulate. It seemed to have settled on surfaces for a moment before completely disintegrating. It was compelling, terrifying proof of an intelligence. It proved a force operated entirely outside the known laws of human physics. As summer approached the Blackwood Valley, the atmosphere around Oak Haven grew darker. The search dogs, initially eager and well-trained, now refused to cross the perimeter. They would whimper and show physical signs of profound distress. The local legend of the Blackwood, Weeping Woods became a chilling reality. Investigators reported hearing faint, almost subliminal sounds. They were described as choral humming and children's laughter. These sounds seemed to emanate directly from the empty houses. Thorne, documenting his findings in a secret tape recorder, described an oppressive feeling. He felt as though he was being observed by an invisible multitude. The darkness was rising, but not from the earth itself. It rose from the horrifying realization that Oak Haven was not truly empty. The town was merely holding its collective breath, waiting. The single most unnerving physical event occurred 3 months after the vanishing. A small team of independent surveyors was setting up near the mayor's home. Without warning, the entire interior of the house was flash frozen. It was not just chilled, every object was literally frozen solid. Water in the pipes instantly turned to ice. Furniture was coated in a thick, feathery rime. A perfectly preserved, iced glass of water sat on the bedside table. The temperature outside at the time was 70 degrees Fahrenheit. The freezing was hyperlocalized, confined only to the mayor's house. It lasted exactly 12 minutes before the ice rapidly sublimated. It left no moisture or melt behind. It was a thermodynamic impossibility. It was a brief, violent reenactment of the vanishing's chilling signature. Thorne's years-long obsession led him to the old, sealed-off mining shafts outside of town. He finally found what the Bureau had missed in its rush to cover up the event. It was a small, concealed leather satchel. It belonged to the town's reclusive elder, the keeper of the lore. Inside was a hand-drawn map of the village. The map was overlaid with ancient, non-terrestrial runic script. It also contained a series of sketches detailing the geometric symbol from the square. The script translated to a ritual of summoning. It was not the summoning of a deity, but of an alignment. The symbol was an anchor point for the event. The Oak Haven villagers, the text revealed, had been preparing for generations. They were ready to offer themselves as a temporary conduit. This was meant to facilitate a planned dimensional shift. Their vanishing, the lore suggested, was a catastrophic, self-willed success. The keeper's satchel and Thorne's explosive findings were immediately suppressed by authorities. The Bureau's superiors were terrified of the inevitable public fallout. They feared the story of a mass suicide cult turned cosmic horror. The Oak Haven case was officially closed by executive order. The village was swiftly designated as an uninsurable, naturally occurring disaster zone. All existing records of Thorne's true findings were classified at the highest level. The mayor's journal, the strange crystalline residue, and the keeper's lore were either destroyed or locked away. They were sent to a remote, high-security government facility. The official line remained firmly fixed: a mass, coordinated flight. The government was not just hiding the truth from the public. They were actively attempting to protect the world from the horrifying implications of that truth. There were no true, direct survivors of the Oak Haven vanishing. However, there were two key peripheral witnesses who lived to tell the tale. The first was the mailman, whose 3-day late arrival spared his life. He became a broken man, convinced he saw something flicker. He claimed it was a vast, colorless light above the church steeple as he drove away. The second witness was Agnes Lowe, a former resident who left years before. She had left Oak Haven in a bitter family dispute. Agnes spoke of her grandmother's strange, lifelong preparations. She recalled the continuous storing of non-perishable goods. She remembered the cryptic prayers she overheard. She spoke of the constant, unshakable fear of the sunless times. Agnes's account validated the unsettling details in the keeper's lore. It painted a portrait of a community preparing for a singular, non-earthly event. Dr. Evelyn Reed, who ultimately went rogue and worked with Thorne, pursued a scientific conclusion. She concluded that Oak Haven was the site of a profound physical anomaly. She posited it was a localized tear in the fundamental fabric of space-time. Her theory, which she called the resonance cascade, suggested the village was key. Built on a unique geological nexus, the area acted as a natural energy amplifier. The villagers' ritualistic actions, culminating at 3:17 a.m., served as the final trigger. It tuned the energy resonance to an extreme frequency. The result was an excision of all organic mass from the current dimension. Psychologically, this spoke to a shared, generational delusion. It was a collective death wish woven into the fabric of their secretive religion. That delusion had achieved a catastrophic, horrifying physical reality. Years after the official case closure, Thorne was working as a private investigator. He received an anonymous package in a plain brown wrapper. The package contained an original, high-resolution photograph. It was taken by a remote surveillance camera tracking an unrelated military exercise. The photo was dated March 14th, 3:17 a.m., the moment of the vanishing. It showed Oak Haven, but the village was not empty in the image. For a split second, the photograph captured a colossal, geometric shadow. The shadow was vast and impossibly sharp. It hovered directly over the village square, completely eclipsing the stars. This colossal shadow was the perfect, exact negative space of the symbol etched into the cobblestones. It suggested the event was not a summoning to Oak Haven. It was a temporary, surgical extraction by something else entirely. The keeper's lore, when finally and fully translated, contained an alarming coda. It was called the Return Protocol. This was a set of complicated instructions meant for the next generation. It was designed to undo the dimensional shift should the new reality prove hostile. The protocol involved a counter-resonance ritual. It required the use of specific, non-terrestrial metals and a precise acoustic frequency. Thorne and Dr. Reed, risking everything, attempted to recreate a portion of the ritual. They performed the attempt near the old Oakhaven well. They succeeded only in momentarily triggering the low song Mr. Silas had heard. This caused a sudden, profound disorientation and a surge of extreme cold air. They realized the counter protocol was not a fix for the vanishing. It was a dangerous, desperate beacon. It was a signal trying to communicate with the horrifying void the villagers now inhabited. The true, final confrontation came not at the haunted village site. It was discovered within the suppressed documents themselves. The mayor's journal contained one final, hastily scrawled entry. It was written mere moments before the clock stopped at 3:17 a.m. The chilling entry read, "The air is humming. It's beautiful, but the children are weeping. They see it now." The agreement was for the adults only. This final, terrifying sentence changes the entire narrative. The villagers did not choose a peaceful, collective vanishing. They chose a collective, ritualistic sacrifice for a singular, horrific purpose. The children, the collateral damage of a secret, generations-old pact, had seen the truth. They saw the true, horrific nature of their destination at the moment of transit. They were not saved. They were betrayed. Oakhaven was never repopulated. No one ever dared to try. The state quickly erected a high, fortified fence. The entire Blackwood Valley was officially designated an ecological preserve. All forms of entry were strictly forbidden and heavily enforced. Thorne and Reed's combined findings were never officially published or credited. Thorne descended into reclusive obsession, a victim of his own investigation. He died years later in a sanitarium, still muttering about the geometric shadow. Reed, however, dedicated her life to the study of fringe physics. Her academic work on interdimensional field collapse now gains secretive traction. The most enduring aftermath is the unnatural silence. It is a deep, profound void that swallows both sound and light. It is a constant, ambient reminder that something fundamental was broken in that valley. Today, Oakhaven is the subject of countless online forums and speculative theories. It has become a dark magnet for amateur investigators and dark tourists. But a far more unsettling connection exists in modern scientific technology. The complex, non-terrestrial crystalline structure Dr. Reed discovered has a striking resemblance. It mirrors a signal pattern recently detected by a deep space radio observatory. The frequency of this interstellar signal is the key. When adjusted for cosmological redshift, it precisely matches the acoustic frequency in the Keeper's Return protocol. The world dismissed Oakhaven as merely local folklore. Now, a silent, rhythmic signal is returning the village's lost echo. It is coming back from the terrifying, lightless depths of space. The theories regarding the true nature of Oakhaven are now legion. They are generally split into three main, competing camps. The cult hypothesis. This theory claims the village was a localized, apocalyptic religious cult. They performed a mass suicide, disposing of all bodies in the vast, unsearched cave systems. The military experiment. This theory argues Oak Haven was the unwitting test site for a secret government energy weapon. The weapon accidentally vaporized all organic matter, necessitating the elaborate cover-up. The extra-dimensional theory. This is the most compelling theory, championed by the late Dr. Reed. It posits that the villagers performed a successful, albeit chaotic, ritual. They opened a temporary wormhole, or thin place. They passed through it, willingly or unwillingly, into a parallel or higher dimension. The evidence points most strongly to a terrifying convergence of all three. The true final revelation comes from the only piece of physical evidence left at the site. It was a common child's writing slate. It was discovered under a loose floorboard in the village schoolhouse. The slate bore a simple, horrifying message. It was not written in chalk, but scratched deeply and violently into the stone. The message read, "We are hungry now." The phrase negates the idea of a peaceful transit or an ascension to a better place. It implies an ongoing, active, and desperate state of being. It suggests a terrifying transformation or a horrific assimilation. It is a survival achieved at a terrible, unconscionable cost. It replaces peace with an eternal, unsettling, and desperate new reality for the 314 souls. 5 decades later, the official investigation into Oak Haven remains technically open. The case file is tragically thin with physical proof, but thick with human dread. We have walked the empty streets and touched the frozen, ghostly windows. We have heard the persistent echoes of the silence. Oak Haven is more than a simple mystery. It is a profound, chilling lesson in the limits of our known world. It reminds us that the universe is vast and the boundaries of reality are brittle. The village did not merely vanish, it moved. And in the cold, dark heart of the Blackwood Valley, the silence is not the absence of sound. It is the sound of something patiently waiting. It is an acoustic frequency echoing from a different reality. It is waiting for the conditions to be right again. It is waiting for the moment to make the quiet louder once more. The case is closed, but the shadow remains, vast and watching.